Hello, my name is Brian Sands, and I am on the board of the John Burton Harter Foundation, where I have been privileged and proud to serve since June of 2020. I first got to know Bert Harter when I was the art director of the Lesbian Gay Community Center in New Orleans, when it was still on North Rampart Street, when after one exhibit, Bert came to me very unassumingly and said, "I'm an artist. Would you like to see my art? And maybe I could do an exhibit with you?" And I was like, "Well, of course, let me see it." And it was wonderful. We did a very successful exhibition with him, and we became friends afterwards. So it was a real thrill to be asked to be part of his foundation. And today, I'm going to be speaking to Charles Leslie, a friend and colleague of Bert's, who was one of the founders with his late partner Fritz Lohman of the Leslie-Lohman Museum of Art here in New York City's Soho. And it is an absolute thrill to speak to Mr. Leslie today. First of all, could you please give us a little history and background of the museum for anyone viewing this who may not be familiar with it?
Well, when Fritz and I met, we both discovered that we both had discrete collections of homoerotic art. And it was one of the many things that bonded us. And we started collecting together. We merged our collections and started collecting more. And then at a certain point, we realized that we had a collection that was exhibition worthy. And so we had a show literally in this loft before when it was just raw. And we sent out a plain brown envelope with an invitation to people in our phone books. You and your friends are invited to a one-weekend show of homoerotic art at the Leslie-Lohman Loft, blah, 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 blah. And we thought we'd get maybe 40 or 50 people. By Sunday night at midnight, people were still ringing the doorbell. And we had probably close to 500 people coming in and out over that long weekend.
And when was this?
2000. No, not 2000. 1969. Yeah.
So pre or post Stonewall, or right around that time?
It was in the same time frame. I mean, everything was happening at once. We had already planned the show before Stonewall, but it hadn't been set up yet. And then Fritz and I were usually out on weekends, and usually at some place like the Stonewall. I don't know why, but we didn't go out that night. We were probably tired or something. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, we got a call from a friend saying, "You've got to come to Sheridan Square immediately." I said, "Craig, it's 2 in the morning." He said, "Yeah, I can't talk. Come now." And we heard this yelling, and it sounded like a world riot going on. So we got in our, the village is right here. So we walked up, and I tell you, it looked like a major riot. But the police, when we got there, the police were backing off. Someone downtown, they'd raided this gay bar. They were constantly raiding gay bars in those days. But when we got there, the police were backing off. It was amazing. Someone got smart down at City Hall and told them to back off. And from that moment on, everything started to change.
And how long was that first exhibit?
Yeah.
Just up for that weekend?
It was for that weekend, yeah.
And so after the incredible response...
Well, we kept it going.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And was it friends only? How did people know?
I don't know. There's this kind of underground gay telephone in the old days. And when word got out, people just kept coming. So we extended the show.
So take us forward. When did it transform from a gallery in your home into the museum?
Well, Fritz and I had been kind of carrying it on our back financially, and our wonderful accountant, bless his memory, Phil Rubin, said, "You have got to stop shouldering this on your own. You've got to turn this into a foundation." So I didn't know much about foundations, but we did that. And then we started getting outside support. People people with a little money started helping us. And over time, that morphed into the museum.
And how did you first meet Bert? Did he come to you, or how did you meet each other?
I think it was about 2000, if I recall correctly. Oh, no, no, no. What am I talking about? 1969.
Oh, so back then.
Yeah, back then, because we were the only game in town when it came to homoerotic art. There was there was no place for it, no venue for it, until we created one. And we created one because we knew lots of wonderful artists who happened to be gay and did a fair amount of gay imagery, and so word got around among artists.
And going forward, how did it evolve that you gave him a show? How did that happen? What was the history of it?
He walked in one day. He'd heard about our little enterprise and said, would you look at my work? And of course we did, and we loved it. And we arranged a show. I think he grew up with a lot of difficulty about being gay. And he was realizing that he was emerging through his art. He was understanding who he was.
And I think it makes reference to, in the book that you edited, that after his mother passed, it was a little easier for him.
The world opened like a flower after
Really?
Mom went away, yeah.
So she kept...
And she must have had a thumb on top of him, you know. And I think it was one of the steps in his process of coming out to himself and to the world, as it were.
And this included homoerotic art as well.
Well, yeah. Some of the male imagery was quite
Right.
in your face.
And was there ever any, and more generally speaking, not only with Bert, any with the problems with the authority of, showing obscenity or anything like that?
One little old Italian lady in the neighborhood sent the police. We were in a space above grade. I mean, you had to go up 2 or 3 steps to look in the windows. But from the sidewalk level, you could see the tops of paintings. You could see the upper, maybe 2/3. And of course, we had this big show by a woman, Marion Pinto, who was a great artist. And this little Italian lady from South Village walked by and called the police. Suddenly, these 2 big cops showed up. And we said, "Oh, officers, are you here to see the show?" And they said, "Well, we got a complaint." And I said, "Oh, really? About what?" I said, "Well, these pictures." And I said, "Well, they're very good, aren't they?" I had this silly conversation back and forth, and finally they just said, "Well, goodbye," and they just left.
And so that not being a problem, after you gave Bert his first show,
Yeah.
tell me more about his ongoing relationship with you and with the museum.
Well, Bert and I hit it off very well together, and I was rather charmed by his slightly funky Southern accent, and also I loved his work. I loved his art.
And did you have other shows with him?
I think we had 2 shows with Bert. One was his own show, and one was part of a group show.
And were these strictly exhibits? Were the works for sale?
In the beginning, the works were all for sale. We had a system whereby the artist got all the money. We didn't take any money because we wanted to encourage this kind of work, and we wanted to encourage artists to keep doing it. So we never took a commission or a percentage or anything. We just said, Fritz and I were able to afford that, and for a while it worked very well.
And at those first shows, were Bert's works purchased? Or
No, they were purchased. He got the money directly. We never took a commission. The artists always got whatever the work cost. Of course, artists were selling their work at rock bottom prices because no one believed that anyone would buy this kind of work. But we helped to change that notion.
It's interesting because when I was the art director of the Lesbian Gay Community Center in New Orleans and gave Bert the show,
Yeah.
we had about 12, 15 paintings of his, and I think he priced them ridiculously high because he didn't want to part with them.
No.
We sold some of his books and cards, but...
That is a syndrome among many artists. They don't want to say goodbye to their work.
And tell me, when it seems to me that did he ever get to see the museum?
Well, he saw our foundation before we became a museum. And we were in the days of the foundation, we were already a kind of mini museum before we had the really big space. But he did get to see that. So he saw the seedling.
And tell me, what was it like working with him on the book of his that you edited? Was it difficult? Did you select? Had he already done much of the work prior to his passing?
He didn't require much editing, so it was so good, you know. Yes. But I think that he was ecstatic to find a public place that would show this kind of work, because at the time there was no such venue except ours.
And given that Bert was hard of hearing, how do you think that influenced his painting style? Was it a way that he was able to communicate in a way that other people may not?
I think that probably there was that element in if you have one deficiency, you become more creative in another area. And I think the art was something that helped him through his hearing problem.
And as you knew him for 30 years
Yeah.
or more, how did you see his art evolve?
Well, to put it very simply, it just got better and better as time went by.
Is there any particular, because one of the things he says in the book was that he went from using photographs and looking at himself in the mirror
Yeah.
to
Live models.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was that part of it, or what else?
Well, I think that was part of it. The live model issue, of course, turned into a catastrophe because he said, I don't hire professional models. He said that to me once. He said, I don't hire professional models. I find them. And of course, I realized that was also an element in his sexuality. He finds people he finds attractive. And of course, it led to his demise in that last instance.
Sure.
And I have to tell you, his murder so shocked me. I sank into a depression for a month. I couldn't believe what happened.
And made worse that it was never solved.
I know. And why it wasn't solved, I can't imagine, because the murderer stole his little red pickup. How could you not trace that? How could you not find where that went?
Sure.
But it never was solved.
Can you tell me a little bit about Bert's desire to have a museum in New Orleans similar to the Leslie-Lohman Museum here in New York?
Yes, he loved the idea of. At that time, we were the only place in the world that advertised itself as a gay museum. And he said, oh, God, we need this in New Orleans. And he said, that's what I'm going to do next. He announced his intention to do it.
And did he consult with you on how to establish something?
Oh, yeah,
like
we
that?
had conversations about it. I said, you just have to go like gangbusters and do it. There's no set recipe for it. You just have to make sure you have a little money behind it so you can do it. And then just do it.
Did you ever come down to New Orleans to see, or?
I'd been in New Orleans a couple times, but I never came down while Bert was there.
And in Bert, did you socialize with him in New York, or did you?
No.
Or was it more a galleryist?
No, it was mixed. I mean, occasionally he'd come by for a drink, or we'd have lunch together. It was, he was a very amenable and pleasant guy.
I know exactly what you mean, because he was so sweet and so simple and so straightforward.
Yeah.
There was no drama with him.
And he had that charming, slightly southern accent, which you just couldn't resist.
I'd love to have you discuss the history of art in general, and especially gay or queer art that was going on back in the days as Bert was establishing himself, and any influences that might have on him.
Well, I think Bert had his eyes open all the time, and he was probably much more aware of gay artists than anyone else, because it was his field. And I know he talked about being influenced by a couple people. Patrick Angus, have you ever heard of Patrick Angus?
Yeah.
And a couple others, but Patrick Angus he mentioned more than once.
I'd say we'll have to do a little research on that, because that's a name I'm not familiar with.
Yeah.
And it does seem that many of the artists who passed in the 80s were very different from Bert, who was very traditional, very realistic.
Yes, he was a classicist, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who do you think his influences were?
I think, well, strange as it may sound, I think Paul Cadmus was one. and I would say Paul Cadmus most of all.
And what do you like best about Bert's paintings?
Well, I love male imagery. That was part of the deal. And he did it in a masterful way. So, it was a win-win situation.
And could you discuss, now that the art scene is very different from when Bert was growing up, how do you see his influence on artists in general, and these days, and especially queer or gay artists, in terms of his life and his art and his legacy?
I've always thought of Bert as one of the founding fathers. His legacy affected and influenced a lot of younger gay artists and continues to do so to this day.
And any names that we should be on the outlook for?
Well, I'd have to check my records, but there was more than one.
Okay. And because it does seem in these days of abstract and conceptual and
Yeah.
minimalist that his is, like you said, classicist and traditional. Do you sense that younger artists might kind of poo-poo it, or that they are now being drawn in a retro way to it?
I'll tell you what has happened in the art world. We went from classicism and realism into this idiotic period of abstract expressionism, where you could throw a can of paint at a canvas and call it art. And that reached a zenith at a certain point and has slowly declined ever since. There is a new awakening to figurative work. And suddenly people are opening their eyes and realizing the value of this stuff. But there is a revival and a rebirth of figurative art and a new appreciation for it. It's finally happening.
It's like everything old is new again.
Yeah, exactly. Same old cycle.
And can you tell me, because you talked about getting together with Bert
Yeah.
for drinks,
Yeah.
do you have any fun, juicy, memorable stories about your times with him?
Well, he was a very accomplished pickup artist. He said, "You won't believe the model I found 2 nights ago." I said, "Model?" He said, "Well, you know what I mean." He never hired professional models. No one does it anymore. All they do is look at a screen.
When he came up here, did he stay with you? Or
Yeah, he stayed in my guest room.
Okay. And just enjoyed,
Well, he loved this place because I had a lot of stuff around that he liked.
which we're definitely going to get a views of. Did you ever get a sense of him, about his family, about his upbringing?
Very little. He talked about it very little. So
Yes.
I'm not one to pry. So I just, I thought he'll tell me whatever he wants to tell me,
Sure.
and that'll be what I know.
Was he proud of coming from Louisville, from New Orleans, or the South in general?
He liked being a Southerner. He was rather proud of being a Southerner. But his association with New Orleans was what he liked the most.
And why do you think that was?
I suppose maybe where he found his first lovers, maybe where he found his first appreciators,
And when he retired in the early 90s, did you sense a change in him, any sort of liberation or?
No, he became liberated before he died. That's for sure.
Sure. Well, I think you've given a wonderful portrait of Bert, who was a singular person. And is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you'd like to add?
The only other thing I would say about Bert, which I think identifies his person, is that he was very lovable. He was a guy you just kind of loved when you met him.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure speaking with Charles Leslie of the Leslie-Lohman Museum and man about town here in Soho.
Still trying.